Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Slotterback. All right, and today I'll be talking about how to scrape data off of various New York City databases to get New York City boiler data. Sorry, everybody else with a boiler. And for all of the materials that I'll be showing, I have links on my Twitter account that I just tweeted out. And also, my GitHub account has a link to this talk. So let me just tell you about my company, Learden Boiler Works. It's kind of a lower tech company. We've been around since '67, so we started out pre-PC, and we still kind of have that mindset sometimes. We service, install residential and commercial heating systems throughout the 5 boroughs and a little bit of Westchester County here and there. Pretty much wherever we can be insured to work, because you definitely want to be insured when you're working with something that can blow up a building. So some of the stuff that we work on is really, really old. Like this thing is probably older than I am. It looks like something that they pulled out of a Star Wars teaser trailer. And as you can see, if you don't know what this boiler or burner equipment already is made out of, pretty much good luck finding a boilerplate that you can actually read data off of. So that's one of the reasons I'm doing all this web scraping, because once upon a time it was written in a database, and that'll be a bit more reliable than all these old faceplates. And some of the newer stuff, this one we can take some credit for because we did the install for this. There's a lot of smaller units, so instead of just being a one and done like this, where all the heat and hot water comes out of this thing, do you really want to depend on this thing for all your heat and hot water needs when you think it's going to fall apart in any second? So this one has a lot of redundancy. There's separate heating units and hot water units. And so it's very reliable, and we're very proud of that job. And so about myself, I came from the physics side of things. I actually have a PhD in physics, so I do have some experience with dealing with pressure. That's about the overlap, and also I've in the course of my thesis work, I worked with mining terabytes of data to get meaningful information. And so I figured, well, we have all this data out there, and I can mine that and make it into something useful. And so I'm the de facto head of IT, because I'm the only one who can fix the email problems and all that. But I mean, they're paying me for it, so I can't complain too much. And my current project, if anybody knows about databases, I'm I'm kind of a novice at it, but I'm trying to build a database so we don't have to rifle through all of our cabinets to find all the data that we need for a given job. And let me just talk about all you need to know about boilers. So just when you think about a boiler, just think a boiler and burner system. Think about the boiler as your tea kettle at home and the burner as the stove top. So that's pretty much it. The tea kettle's the vessel, the burner's where the heat's coming from. Now in this city, we have 2 primary fuel types. We have natural gas and we have, they call it 2-oil, which is a very refined fuel oil. There is still what's called grade 4 oil. Higher number is worse for the environment generally. So they're phasing that out by 2030. They just phased out the really bad stuff that my dad came home smelling like. It's called 6-oil. They just phased that out in June, so you could all breathe easier. And surprisingly enough, they phased coal out of school boilers in 2001. So, you know, we just marched into the 21st century there. Now, there are two key governing bodies. There's the Department of Buildings, first of all. They have many responsibilities. I'm primarily focused on the fact that they inspect the structural integrity of the boilers to make sure that they're structurally sound, and that you know, you don't have to worry about the boiler rupturing or causing fires, which, you know, certainly last year in East Harlem, that was a huge disaster with that gas main rupturing. So they are on the job. They inspect these things every year, inside and outside. And so as a boiler company, I want to make sure that my clients have been inspected each year. And so I want to go into their DOB database and make sure that our clients have gotten inspected each year. And they put all of their data on what's called the Building Information System, or BIS for short. The link for this database I have tweeted on my Twitter account from before. The other governing body that we're concerned about is the Department of Environmental Protection. Their main concern is that we are not overly polluting the air that we breathe. That's one of the reasons that they phased out 6-oil, is because even when you burn small amounts of it, you get a lot of fine particulates. If you're into environmental studies, they put out a lot of what's called PM 2.5, the kind of stuff that really aggravates asthma and a lot of other things. And so they want to make sure that the boilers that are installed across the city are burning at a minimal level of efficiency, because when it's if it's burning very inefficiently, you know, the burner's not getting enough air or something like that, even with cleaner fuels like natural gas and 2-oil, you'll still get a lot of soot and fine particulates, and they want to keep that to a minimum. So they have, so you have to get a license to burn fuel in this city at certain capacities. So for about, you know, say 6 unit buildings and up, they have what's called a triennial registration. It's just kind of like an auto registration where you just renew it, and they make sure that your unit is current and on record. And for the bigger ones, you know, like I'm going to be using the building from Ghostbusters, 55 Central Park West, a lot in this talk. They, every 3 years, they do a performance test, and they make sure that the draft regulators are working properly, the efficiency is appropriate, and they grant, if it's acceptable, they grant what's called a certificate of operation, or CO. And so they post all this information about registrations and certificates of operation on what's called the Clean Air Tracking System, or CATS for short. I don't have any cat pics, so I feel like I should have. Okay, now before we get into the scraping, I'm just going to do a really brief run-through of the kind of web scraping that we come across. There's two types that we come across. We scrape tables, and we scrape web links off of these databases. First, if you have, so here's an example where you have an HTML file with a simple table, and if you want to scrape this data, you would use a package called Beautiful Soup. Now, I'm just going to briefly show what the code looks like because I don't have time to go through every line of my ugly code. So this will you could at least look at this and say, well, that's what it's doing in principle, and you can steal this and use it in your own web scraping. So you just import the request, or URL lib.request, the package Beautiful Soup, which there's already been a very good talk about that earlier today. I forget the speaker's name. If anybody remembers it, just shout it out. And so you open that web page or that HTML file that I wrote, put it through this Beautiful Soup program. It releases a tree parsing object, and you find all the instances of the table, find all the columns in that table, and pull the text out of them, and you get the table, a reconstruction of the table that we displayed in the HTML file. And also, if there are web links, so this is a demo file with 3 web links, a.html, first, second, third, and so on. It would look like this in principle, and we do that same stuff that we did before, except we find all instances of web links in HTML. That's just the A tag. And then to grab all those links, we just create a little list comprehension of all the hrefs, the reference tags. And as you can see, we get the HTML links. So that's web scraping for dummies and people like me. Now for the DEP Boiler Data, to use a pun, it's boilerplate. Okay, everything that comes out of this DOB BIS website is just a series of tables. So all we got to do is find the right table and grab all the elements like I showed you. And so what I do is in the file I wrote, which is on my repository, I type in, now this is the borough code. It's 1 for Manhattan, 2 for Bronx, 3 for Brooklyn, 4 for Queens, 5 for Staten Island. And you put in 55 and separate line, Central Park West. And it spits out this table. Now this is kind of an ugly way to look at it. So I'll just show you what it looks like on their website. There's 2 boilers in there. They both have the same number because they were installed about the same year, and they're numbered 1 and 2. And as you can see, they were inspected just a couple months ago. So we're good. You just have to worry about Gozer in that building now. So back to our talk. Whoops, that to do. Here we go. It's coming. And it's going to be a little slower than I anticipated. So I'll just keep it, I won't go full screen anymore. And the next. Yes, and now the DEP boiler data is going to be a bit more involved because we can't search it for directly by building address. And I will explain why that is. Fortunately, at least once we get the data, it's in the same kind of format as the BIS data was. Just grab a table, pull the elements out, and Bob's your uncle. But the only problem is every time you run a query, there's a little CAPTCHA that you have to type in. And that is kind of annoying to, I wasn't about to, write a program that de-CAPTCHA'd the CAPTCHA because my PhD is in physics, not computer engineering. So it looks like this. So I already ran the query, and these are the two current applications, and these are the data. So it gives, now this is especially valuable to me because it doesn't just tell me whether or not they're current, but it also gives me the boiler and burner information. I can tell the dispatcher what equipment this building has if they have a problem with their boiler, and they can tell the technician, and the technician can make sure that they have the appropriate parts to address the problem before they drive all the way there and drive all the way to the Bronx to pick up the right parts. So it's a real time saver if I can get all these data in one place. And probably because of this CAPTCHA thing, there's no real good API out there to interface with this database. And there's a couple of databases with these data on NYC Open Data, but I find them all to be incomplete. Some of them only have the 4 and 6 oil permits in their database, which is only a fraction of them. And another one that just showed up last month only has 700 boilers on it when there's more than 700 boilers that were installed in 1985 alone. So I basically have to build one of these databases by myself. Now, fortunately, there is a slick way to get around the CAPTCHA. So you see here, when I go to this application ID, it says all this garbage, success, and then the application number. Well, now if I say change this to 159, here we go. Now we're on a totally different building, and so, knowing that,
did you tell them that?
I'm telling them that now. So yes, and I just said what I said now, and there's some weirdness as to the rules of the first two letters. It's everything from the 20th century is CA, 4-digit number, last 2 digits of the year. From 2000 on, they thought that they would be clever with it. They would say, oh, well, it's the 21st century, so let's call it CB so-and-so. And then 4 years ago, they're like, oh, well, let's call the big jobs CB and the little registrations CR. And so so it's a little hairy, and my code deals with that, and that's all I really need to say about that. And so then, so I run this code that cycles through all of those possible combinations. And it takes about 2 weeks to get all those data. So there's a bit of overhead to this function. That's mainly because it takes about, on this old EEE PC, it took about a second to get each entry. And I made sure to run it when it wasn't normal business hours because I didn't want them to, say, oh, you're DDoSing our server or something like that. Which I wasn't because I was doing one entry at a time. And so I was fine. And so, as you can see, I enter these CA numbers for Central Park West. I get all of the data that were on those sites in a nice list. And then I also throw them into a big old CSV file, which I plan to, once I understand databases properly, put them all together so I could run SQL queries on them and learn as much as I can about our clients' boilers and also the boilers at large, because I already have the data, so why not? And there, it's technically freely available online. A couple of miscellaneous things. Staten Island really is the forgotten borough. Sometimes the entries have Staten Island no space and Staten Island with a space, and some of them cause their database to crash. But they forgot about it. And some of the older ones, they don't have the building ID, block and lot, DOB information on them. So I had to make sure that I handled the case where those little bits of information didn't show up in the DEP queries. And also, I initially thought that that arbitrary 4-digit number went from 1 to 99999 every year and then started back at 0. But after 2011, if it ends at 3000 in 2012, it starts at 3001 in 2013. So there's a lot of quirks that I'm learning about just by pulling all these data. And so as I continue, I just need to finish collecting these data because I left some out in the interest of time. I would like to alter the code to collect permit data from the DOB website because we do a lot of installs and we want to make sure that we have our permits all in order before we start demolishing a burner without city approval because they don't like that. And I'd also like to build an update routine so that way we can re-query a subset of these boiler data whenever a certain amount of time has passed. So because sometimes these permits get renewed every 3 years, and I don't want to miss them. And and I'd also like to run some queries and see if I could find any trends in the boiler and burner data. Are people going to the more efficient stuff, or are people using the same old burners they've been using since the 80s? And also, I'd like to work out a way to do the DEP search by building address. The tricky part with that is that sometimes a bigger building will have one primary address and a bunch of sub-addresses. Like, just to give you an example, 55 Central Park West is also 57 Central Park West, or 2 or 4 West 66th Street. if we get a call from any of those 4 addresses, it's for this boiler room. And so I need to be able to account for that somehow. So that is actually all that I had to talk about today, which, just works out. Special thanks to one of our collaborators, James Lycan, for providing the boiler photos that I showed you earlier. Special thanks to my sister, who went through the painstaking process of pulling all that DEP data and typing in the CAPTCHAs before I figured out that trick. Which was also helpful because it provided a baseline for me to compare it to. So I wasn't just generating random boiler data, which would be useless. I'd like to thank the folks at NYC Python, especially Piper Thunstrom, who couldn't be here for this session, for many helpful discussions that helped me become a better Python programmer. And also for the various unsung heroes that wrote these databases, wrote beautiful soup, and answered questions on Stack Exchange, like Aaron Hall here, who writes tons of, and I probably used half your code. So thank you all for listening, and I'm willing to take any questions. Okay. Thank you.
I was curious, when you were talking about the address things like multiple buildings sharing the same asset, is that related to the tax lot distinction like Pluto is, or is it a completely separate issue where they literally like multiple buildings sharing the same boiler room?
Well, I think the issue is that this block and tax lot spans multiple possible addresses, because it's based on how wide the front of the building is, so not really on the number.